The first thing I heard wasn't "I love you," or "we're rich," or even a simple gasp of shock. The first thing I heard was the sharp, ugly sound of a zipper being pulled on a suitcase. I was standing in the kitchen, my hands still smelling of the onions I had just chopped for the meatloaf, the one he always said was his favorite. The lottery numbers were being announced on the little television we kept on the counter, the one with the tin foil on the antenna. I wasn't really paying attention, not until the announcer's voice rose with an unusual excitement. And the final number is 42. We have a winner. A single ticket sold right here in Northwood has won the $50 million grand prize. My heart did a little flutter. We always played the same numbers. A silly little ritual we'd had for 20 years. The kids' birthdays, our anniversary. I turned, a smile already forming on my face, ready to share a laugh with Richard about how it was never us. But he wasn't in the living room. The zipping sound came again, this time from our bedroom. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked down the hall, a sense of confusion starting to curdle the hopeful excitement in my stomach. "Richard," I called out. "Did you hear that? Someone in town won." He was standing by the bed with his old leather suitcase open, the one he only used for business trips. He was folding his best shirts, his movements precise and cold. He didn't look at me. "I heard, Alina," he said. His voice was flat, a stranger's voice in my husband's body. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice small. The smile had completely vanished from my face. "Are you going somewhere? You didn't tell me you had a trip." He finally stopped folding and looked up at me. His eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with what I thought was love for 35 years, were like chips of ice. "I'm leaving," he said. I let out a shaky laugh. "Leaving? What do you mean, leaving? To the conference in a few days. You're packing a little early, aren't you?" "No, Alina," he said, placing a stack of folded trousers into the suitcase. "I'm leaving you." The words didn't make sense. They were like pieces of a foreign language. I felt my mind trying to arrange them into an order that I could understand, but they just kept falling apart. "Leaving me? Richard, that's not funny." "The meatloaf is almost ready." It was a stupid thing to say, but it was all I could think of. The meatloaf, the familiar routine. The dinner we were supposed to share. He snapped the suitcase shut. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. "It was my ticket, Alina. I bought it, with my money. The winnings are mine." He walked over to the dresser and pulled out his wallet. He took out a small stack of bills and tossed them onto the bed. They scattered across the quilt I had stitched myself. "Here's $1,000. It should be enough for you to find a cheap motel for a few weeks until you figure something out." I stared at the money, then back at his face. "Figure something out? Richard, what are you talking about? This is our home." "We've been married for 35 years. "And it's been the 35 longest years of my life," he sneered. The cruelty in his voice was a physical thing. It felt like a slap. "I never loved you. You were just convenient. A good little housewife to cook the meals and raise the kids. But I'm done. I'm rich now. I don't have to pretend anymore." Every word was a nail being hammered into my heart. I couldn't breathe. My entire world, the world I had so carefully and lovingly built for over 3 decades, was being demolished right in front of me. "The children," I whispered. "What about Mark and Jessica?" "They're grown," he said with a shrug. "They can take care of themselves. I'll give them some money when I get settled. But you," he pointed a finger at me, "you get nothing else. This house is in my name. The cars are in my name. The bank accounts are mine. I made the money, I get to keep it." He picked up the suitcase and walked towards the door. I was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was a nightmare. I was going to wake up any second, and he would be in the living room, complaining about the commercials on TV, and I would be in the kitchen, pulling our dinner out of the oven. But I didn't wake up. He stopped at the bedroom door and looked back at me, his face twisted into a mask of disgust. "I want you out of my house in 1 hour. If you're still here when I get back, I'll have the police remove you for trespassing." And then he was gone. I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor, the front door opening, and then the slam of it closing. a sound that marked the end of my life as I knew it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the empty doorway. Then my legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. The $1,000 he had thrown at me lying like an insult on the bed we had shared for 35 years. I cried. I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. I cried for the man I thought I knew, for the life I thought we had, for the future that had been stolen from me in the space of a single lottery announcement. After the tears ran out, a deep, chilling cold settled in my bones. He had said 1 hour. I looked at the clock. 20 minutes had already passed. He was serious. He would actually call the police on me. Slowly, like an old woman, I got to my feet. I looked around the room that had been mine for so long. The photographs on the wall, the worn armchair where I'd read stories to my children, the faded curtains I had sewn. Everything was a memory, and none of it was mine to keep. But as I stood there, amidst the wreckage of my life, a tiny spark ignited in the cold emptiness of my chest. A thought, small and quiet at first, but then growing stronger. I remembered something about that lottery ticket, something my dear husband, in his arrogant rush to discard me, had completely forgotten. My name is Alina Vance. I am 58 years old, and my husband thought he had left me with nothing. But he was wrong. He had left me with a secret. And that secret was about to become his worst nightmare. I moved through the house like a ghost, my feet barely making a sound on the familiar wooden floors. Each room was a separate chapter of my life, a story I was now being violently ripped out of. I saw the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe where we had measured Mark and Jessica's height each year. I saw the faint wine stain on the living room rug from our 20th anniversary party. I saw the rocking chair in the nursery, a room that had become a guest room years ago, where I had spent countless sleepless nights humming lullabies. These weren't just things. They were the very fabric of my existence, and Richard was tearing it all to shreds with a casual cruelty that was more painful than any physical blow. I went back into the bedroom and gathered the scattered $20 bills from the quilt. $1,000. A pittance. An insult. 35 years of my life, of raising his children, of supporting his career, of managing his home, of being his partner in every sense of the word, and he had valued it all at $1,000. I stuffed the bills into my purse. Then I opened my closet. My clothes hung there, a colorful timeline of my life. The dress I wore to Jessica's college graduation, the simple blouse from my first date with Richard, the comfortable sweaters I lived in every winter. I could only take what I could carry. I pulled out a small overnight bag, the one I used for weekend trips to see my sister, and began to pack, my movements robotic. I packed only the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, the small jewelry box that held my mother's wedding ring and a pair of pearl earrings from my father. As I packed, my mind kept replaying Richard's words. I never loved you. You were just convenient. I don't have to pretend anymore. Had it all been a lie? Every anniversary card, every I love you whispered in the dark, every shared laugh over a silly movie. Was it possible for someone to live a lie for 35 years? The man I had shared my bed with last night was a stranger. The man who had kissed me goodbye that morning before he left for work was an actor playing a part. The thought made me feel nauseous. With my bag packed, I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling utterly lost. Where was I supposed to go? My sister lived 3 states away. My parents were gone. All my friends were our friends, couples we socialized with, who would take my side against a newly minted multimillionaire. I thought of my children. Mark, my eldest, had always been so much like his father, practical, ambitious, a little too impressed by money and status. He would likely be swayed by the promise of his father's newfound wealth. Jessica, my daughter, was different. She had my heart, a soft and empathetic nature, but she was also fragile. I didn't want to burden her with this, not yet. This was my fight. And that's when the spark I'd felt earlier began to burn brighter. The memory. It came back to me with perfect clarity. It was from 3 days ago on Tuesday afternoon. I had just come back from the city. I'd gone to a special antique dealer to finally sell my mother's old china set. It was a beautiful set, but it just sat in the cabinet collecting dust, and we needed money to fix the leaking roof. Richard had been complaining about the cost for weeks, saying we just didn't have it in the budget. I got $700 for the set, a good price. I came home feeling proud, like I had contributed, solved a problem. Richard was on his way out the door to run some errands. He was grumbling about having to stop for gas. I opened my purse, the $700 in crisp $100 bills tucked into an envelope. "Here," I said, pulling out one of the bills. "Use this for gas." He'd taken it without a word of thanks. Then, as he was about to leave, I remembered it was Tuesday, the day we always bought our lottery ticket. "Oh, Richard, wait," I said, pulling out a $20 bill from my own wallet, money I kept separate for my little indulgences, a new book or a nice lunch. "Can you pick up a lottery ticket for us? Use our numbers." He had sighed, annoyed at the delay. "It's a waste of money, a leaner." "Please," I'd insisted. "It's my $20, just get it for fun." He snatched the 20 from my hand and grumbled something under his breath before walking out the door. He had bought our winning ticket not with his money, as he so proudly claimed, but with mine. Specifically, with a $20 bill from my wallet, which I had asked him to use to buy a ticket for us. The word was critical, us. It wasn't his ticket, it was ours. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through me. This wasn't just a moral injustice, it was a legal one. He hadn't just discarded me emotionally, he had tried to defraud me. He was counting on me being a meek, heartbroken little housewife who would just crumble and disappear. He had known me for 35 years, and yet he didn't know me at all. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for passivity. He had forgotten that the quietest people often have the most resilient strength. I looked at the clock. I had 10 minutes left. I walked over to the desk in the corner of the living room. It was Richard's desk, always meticulously organized. I knew what I was looking for. Under a stack of bills, I found the little slip of paper from the lottery terminal. There it was, Tuesday's date, the numbers of our children's birthdays, the proof. I took out my phone and took a clear picture of the ticket. Then, I took a picture of the receipt from the antique dealer for the china set, which was still in my purse. I then tucked the lottery slip carefully into a hidden pocket in my wallet. He would assume I had overlooked it in my grief. With my small bag in one hand and my purse in the other, I took one last look at the house. It was no longer my home. It was a crime scene, a place of betrayal. I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt a cold, hard resolve. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me, not slamming it as he had done. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a dramatic exit. My exit would be quiet, but my return would be thunderous. I walked down the driveway and stood on the sidewalk. I had no car. He had taken the only set of keys for the one we shared. I had $1,000 and a cell phone. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sunset, the kind Richard and I used to watch from the porch, but I wasn't watching it with him. I was watching it alone, a homeless woman in a wealthy suburb. I started walking, with no destination in mind, just away from that house. He thought he was starting a new life of freedom and luxury. He had no idea that I was starting a new life too. A life as the woman who was going to take back everything he had stolen from me, and more. The game was on, and I was going to win. The first night was the hardest. The reality of my situation crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow as I checked into the Sleepy Hollow Motel, a dingy establishment on the outskirts of town with a flickering neon sign and the faint smell of bleach and despair. The room cost $89. I paid in cash, handing over one of the crisp $20 bills Richard had thrown at me. The irony was not lost on me. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, barely glanced at me. I was just another transient soul passing through. Inside the room, the threadbare carpet and stained floral bedspread seemed to mock the life I had left behind. Just hours ago, I had been sleeping on high thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, my small bag on the floor beside me. The silence in the room was absolute, a stark contrast to the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards in my home. I was utterly and completely alone. I resisted the urge to call my children. What would I say? Your father won $50 million and has thrown me out on the street. It sounded like something from a bad soap opera. I couldn't subject them to that, not yet. Mark would probably call his father, and Richard would spin a web of lies, painting me as unstable or greedy. Jessica would be heartbroken, and her pain would only amplify my own. No, I had to be strategic. I had to be strong. Instead of calling my family, I opened the cheap motel notepad and a pen that was chained to the nightstand. I started to write. I wrote down everything I could remember about the lottery ticket, the time of day, the conversation we had, the fact that I had specifically said it was for us. I wrote down the details of selling my mother's china, the name of the antique shop, the amount I received. I was building a case brick by brick. My grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but now it was mixed with something else, determination. The next morning, I woke up stiff and unrested. I bought a coffee and a stale pastry from the motel lobby and sat in a plastic chair by the window, watching the morning traffic rush by. People going to work, to their lives, to their homes. I had none of that anymore. I took out my phone and began my research. I searched for lottery winnings divorce and legal rights spouse lottery. The information was a confusing jumble of legal jargon, but the general consensus seemed to be that if the ticket was purchased with marital assets, the winnings were considered joint property. My $20 earned during our marriage was a marital asset. My case was strong, but I knew Richard. He would have already hired the best lawyers money could buy. They would be sharks, ready to tear me apart. I couldn't fight them alone. I needed my own shark. I searched for top divorce lawyers in the state. The names that came up were from huge, expensive firms in the city, firms that would likely demand a retainer I couldn't possibly afford. I scrolled down the list, feeling a fresh wave of hopelessness. Then I changed my search. Female lawyers specializing in contested assets. A smaller, less flashy list appeared. One name stood out, Sarah Jenkins, Jenkins Law. The website was simple, professional. Her bio said she had started her own firm to help individuals fight against powerful corporate and financial interests. Her motto was champion for the underdog. I felt a flicker of hope. She sounded like exactly the kind of person I needed. I called the number. A polite receptionist answered, and I asked to make a consultation. "What is the nature of the issue?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "My husband recently came into a significant amount of money," I said, my voice steady, "and he is attempting to exclude me from my rightful share." It felt good to say it out loud, to frame it in legal, emotionless terms. The receptionist booked me an appointment for the following afternoon. The office was in the city, an hour away by bus. For the first time in 35 years, I would have to navigate public transportation by myself. The thought was daunting, but also strangely liberating. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ate dinner alone at a small, family-run diner down the road from the motel. I ordered a simple grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup. As I ate, I watched the other patrons. A young couple holding hands, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a mother trying to coax her toddler to eat his vegetables. They were all living their ordinary lives, completely unaware of the extraordinary drama unfolding in mine. A news report came on the diner's small television. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a local news segment, and there was Richard's face, smiling broadly for the cameras. He was holding a giant check from the State Lottery Commission, $50 million. He looked younger, happier than I had seen him in years. A young, blonde woman was clinging to his arm, looking at him with adoring eyes. The reporter's voiceover explained that Richard Vance, a local financial planner, was the lucky winner. "Mr. Vance, what are your plans for the winnings?" The reporter asked. Richard beamed. "Well, first I'm going to take my wonderful girlfriend, Tiffany, on a trip to Paris," he said, squeezing the woman's arm. "And then I'm starting a new life, a life of freedom with no one holding me back." The camera zoomed in on Tiffany, who giggled and kissed his cheek. I felt the eyes of the other diner patrons on the screen, then on me. My face was burning with a mixture of shame and white-hot fury. He hadn't even waited a full day to replace me, to publicly humiliate me. He had a girlfriend. How long had that been going on? Was my entire marriage a lie built on top of another lie? The waitress came over to my table. "Honey, you all right?" she asked, her voice thick with sympathy. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I choked out, pushing my half-eaten soup away. I paid my bill and fled the diner, the sound of Richard's triumphant laughter echoing in my ears. Back in my motel room, the anger boiled over. The humiliation was unbearable. He wasn't just leaving me, he was erasing me. He was rewriting our entire history, casting me as the villain, the person who was holding him back. I lay in bed that night, but I didn't cry. The tears had been replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was no longer just about the money. It was about my name, my dignity, my 35 years of life that he was trying to toss away like garbage. He wanted a fight. Well, now he was going to get one. I thought about my meeting with Sarah Jenkins tomorrow. I would not walk into her office as a victim. I would walk in as a warrior. Eleanor Vance was gone. In her place was a woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to gain. The bus ride to the city was an assault on the senses. The hiss of the hydraulic brakes, the mix of stale perfume and wet wool, the constant rumble of the engine vibrating through the worn vinyl seat. It was a world away from the quiet, climate-controlled interior of the Lexus Richard had always driven. For 35 years, my world had been a carefully curated bubble of suburban comfort. Now, that bubble had burst, and I was adrift in the messy, unpredictable reality of public transit. I clutched my purse, the worn leather a small comfort in this alien environment. Inside, nestled in its secret pocket, was the lottery slip, my Excalibur. I watched the manicured lawns of Northwood give way to strip malls, then industrial parks, and finally the towering steel and glass canyons of downtown. I felt impossibly small, a 58-year-old woman in a sensible coat, invisible to the throng of important-looking people striding purposefully along the sidewalks. For a moment, doubt washed over me. What was I doing? Richard was already on television, a celebrity, a millionaire. I was a nobody with less than $900 to my name. Who would ever believe me? But then I pictured his face, beaming next to that woman, Tiffany. The casual cruelty in his voice as he called me a convenience he no longer needed. The anger returned, a hot, protective flame, and it burned away the doubt. I was not a nobody. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was here to claim what was mine. Jenkins Law was located in a modest but well-maintained older building, sandwiched between a trendy coffee shop and an independent bookstore. There was no marble lobby or vast, intimidating reception desk. The office itself was on the 3rd floor, and the waiting room was small and welcoming, with comfortable chairs, a pot of fresh coffee, and shelves filled with actual books, not just leather-bound legal encyclopedias for show. It felt like a place where real people came for help. The receptionist offered me a warm smile and a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, a woman emerged from an inner office. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Sarah Jenkins. Please come in." Sarah Jenkins was not what I expected. She was younger, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a tailored blazer and jeans, a combination of professional and approachable that immediately put me at ease. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. Her office was like the waiting room, organized, functional, with photos of her family, a smiling husband and 2 young children on her desk. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I began, my voice a little shaky as I sat in the chair opposite her desk. "Of course," she said, her tone kind but direct. "My assistant said you're dealing with a sudden and significant change in marital assets. Why don't you start from the beginning and tell me everything?" And so I did. I told her the whole story, starting with the lottery announcement and ending with Richard's face on the diner television screen. I tried to keep my voice even, to present the facts without breaking down, but my hands trembled as I spoke. I recounted the conversation about the ticket, his annoyance, my insistence that he buy it for us with my $20. I pulled out the small notebook from the motel and referred to the notes I had made, detailing the timeline with as much precision as I could muster. Sarah listened without interruption, her pen moving occasionally across a legal pad. She didn't offer platitudes or empty expressions of sympathy. She just listened, her focus entirely on me, making me feel as though my story was the most important thing in the world at that moment. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "And you have proof of this?" she asked, her voice quiet. This was the moment. My hand shook as I reached into my purse. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo of the lottery slip with the date clearly visible. Then I showed her the photo of the receipt from the antique dealer for my mother's china. Finally, I took the actual lottery slip from my wallet and laid it on the desk between us. It looked so small, so flimsy, this little piece of paper that had destroyed one life and was about to ignite another. Sarah picked up the slip, examining it carefully. She looked at the photos on my phone, then back at me. A slow smile spread across her face. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. "Alina," she said, and it was the first time she had used my first name. "Your husband is a very arrogant man, and a very foolish one. He has just handed us a gift." I felt a surge of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. "So, you believe me? You think I have a case?" "Believe you?" She scoffed lightly. "Alina, you have a fortress. In this state, any assets acquired during a marriage are considered marital property. That includes lottery winnings, especially when the ticket was purchased with funds that are demonstrably marital. You selling your mother's china to pay for a roof repair is a marital transaction. You giving him money from your wallet to buy a ticket for us is a marital act. He can claim it was his ticket all he wants, but the law is very clear. That $50 million is not his. It's yours, plural, 50-50. I finally allowed a few tears to escape, wiping them away quickly. "His lawyers, he'll hire the best." "I know," Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with a fighting spirit. "And they will be vicious. They will try to paint you as a liar, a gold digger, a bitter woman scorned. They'll dig into every aspect of your life to find dirt. They will argue that your $20 was a gift, that for us is a meaningless phrase. Our job is to prove them wrong. And with this," she tapped the lottery slip, "we have the smoking gun." A new anxiety began to creep in. The cost. "Ms. Jenkins, Sarah, I have to be honest with you. I have $812 to my name. I'm staying at a motel. I can't afford a lawyer like you." She leaned back in her chair, studying me for a long moment. I felt my hope begin to wither. I had come so close. "Alina, let me be honest with you," she said finally, leaning forward again. "Cases like this are my passion. I started this firm to stop bullies like your husband from crushing people like you. The injustice here is staggering. And frankly, the evidence is so strong, this case is a lawyer's dream." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I'm not going to take your $800. I'm going to take your case on contingency." I must have looked confused, because she explained. "It means I don't get paid unless you get paid. I will cover all the upfront costs, the filing fees, the investigators, everything. In return, my firm will take a percentage of the final settlement or judgment we win for you. It's a risk for me, but in this case," she smiled again, "I think it's a very, very good risk. I'm betting on you, Alina." I was speechless. This woman, this stranger, was willing to go to war for me, to front thousands of dollars in legal fees, all based on my story and a little slip of paper. For the first time since Richard had zipped up his suitcase, I felt a genuine, unadulterated sense of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a champion. "Now," Sarah said, her voice shifting into a brisk, business-like tone. "We need to move fast, before he can hide the money in offshore accounts or spend it all on his—" What did you call her? "Tiffany." She said the name with a perfect note of disdain. Our first step is to file an emergency motion with the family court. We will ask a judge to issue a temporary restraining order to freeze all of his assets, including the full lottery winnings. The Lottery Commission hasn't transferred the lump sum yet. It takes a few days. We need to stop that transfer before it happens. I'll have my team draft the motion this afternoon. She handed me a stack of papers. This is our retainer agreement outlining the contingency fee. Read it carefully, but I can tell you it's a standard percentage. Sign it if you agree, and we can get to work immediately. I read the document, but the words were a blur. All I could see was a lifeline. I signed my name, my hand surprisingly steady. Eleanor Vance. It felt like the first real thing I had done in my new life. Good, Sarah said, taking the papers. Now here are your instructions. They are very important. Do not, under any circumstances, contact Richard. Do not contact Tiffany. Do not contact your children yet. Don't talk to anyone about this. Let them all think you've vanished. Your husband's lawyers will be trying to find you, to serve you with divorce papers, and offer you some pathetic, insulting settlement to make you go away. We, on the other hand, are going to be the ones to strike first. You are going to be a ghost until we're ready for you to appear. She stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. Go back to your motel. Get some rest. My office will be in touch tomorrow with an update. Try not to worry, Eleanor. Richard Vance thinks he's on top of the world. He has no idea what's about to hit him. I walked out of Jenkins Law and back into the bustling city streets. But this time, I didn't feel small or invisible. I felt like a giant. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I had a plan. I had an ally. And I had a secret weapon, the truth. As I boarded the bus back to the Sleepy Hollow Motel, I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back was not the broken-hearted housewife who had left that morning. Her eyes were red-rimmed, yes, but they were also shining with a fierce, unwavering light. The battle had just begun. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in quiet patience, a skill I had perfected over 35 years of marriage, but was now repurposing for war. I stayed in my motel room, which had begun to feel less like a prison and more like a bunker. I subsisted on vending machine snacks and lukewarm coffee, the television remaining resolutely off. I had no desire to see Richard's smug face parading across the screen again. My phone became my only link to the outside world, and I watched it with the intensity of a hawk, waiting for a call from Sarah. It came late on Thursday afternoon. Eleanor, it's Sarah, I have news. Her voice was calm, but I could hear an undercurrent of excitement. The judge granted our motion. All of Richard's assets, including the $50 million, are frozen solid. He can't touch a dime of it without a court order. I sank onto the lumpy bed, a wave of relief washing over me. So, what happens now? Now he finds out, Sarah said, a hint of satisfaction in her tone. The order was served to his lawyer an hour ago. I would imagine that right about now, your husband is having a very, very bad day. His credit cards will be declined. His checks will bounce. The wire transfer from the Lottery Commission has been halted. Welcome to the first day of his new life. I couldn't help but smile. I imagined him in a fancy restaurant with Tiffany, his card being rejected as he tried to pay for champagne. I imagined the panic in his eyes as he realized his $50 million key to freedom no longer worked. He also got another surprise this afternoon, Sarah continued. Our process server delivered our divorce filing to him personally. We beat him to it. In the eyes of the court, you are the plaintiff, the one initiating the action. You are the petitioner, Eleanor, not the respondent. It's a small psychological victory, but an important one. So I've officially filed for divorce. The words felt strange in my mouth. You have, on the grounds of irreconcilable differences and fraudulent misappropriation of marital assets. Now, the real work begins. His legal team will respond, and they will come out swinging. They'll file motions to unfreeze the assets, they'll deny everything, and they'll start the character assassination. Stay strong, and stay hidden. True to Sarah's prediction, the first volley from Richard's side came the next morning. It wasn't a legal document. It was a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I answered, knowing I had to. "Mom, it's Mark." My son's voice was strained, confused. "Mom, what is going on? I just got a call from Dad. He's freaking out. He said you've hired some lawyer and you've frozen all his money. He said you're trying to steal his lottery winnings." The accusation stung, even though I knew it was coming. Richard was using our son as a pawn. "Mark, honey, it's complicated," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "What did your father tell you?" "He said he won the lottery, and that you two decided to separate, and now you're trying to take all the money. He said you disappeared and he was worried about you, but now he sees it was all a plan to rob him." A plan to rob him. The audacity was breathtaking. "Mark, I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice firm. "Your father and I did not decide to separate. He threw me out of the house with 1 hour's notice and $1,000. He told me he never loved me and that our 35 years of marriage was a lie. He did that before he told me about the money. The lottery ticket was purchased with my money for the two of us. He is the one trying to steal, not me." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear my son's mind trying to process two completely different versions of reality. He said you were unstable, Mom. That you've been acting strange since forever." That was it. The character assassination had begun. I was the crazy, unstable, greedy wife. "Mark, do you believe him?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I don't know what to believe," he stammered. "It's just $50 million, Mom. It changes things." "Yes," I said, my heart aching. "It certainly does. It changes a husband into a monster, and it seems to change a son's faith in his own mother. I can't tell you what to believe, Mark. You'll have to decide for yourself who has been telling you the truth for the past 28 years. But I am your mother, and I am telling you now that your father is a liar and a thief. I have to go." I hung up before he could respond, my hand trembling. The conversation had hurt more than I expected. My own son, so easily swayed by the allure of money. I immediately called Sarah and told her what happened. "Good," she said, surprisingly. "You handled that perfectly. You were calm, you stated your truth, and you ended the conversation. Mark is confused, but you've planted a seed of doubt. Now, what about your daughter?" As if on cue, another call came through. It was Jessica. "Mom, oh, thank God you're okay." Her voice was a torrent of panicked relief. "I've been calling you for 2 days. I called the house and Dad answered. He was so weird. He said you'd gone on a trip to visit Aunt Carol, but I called Aunt Carol and she said she hadn't heard from you. I knew something was wrong. What's happening? Mark just called me and said something insane about you and Dad and the lottery." I told Jessica the same story I told Mark, but her reaction was entirely different. "He what?" She shrieked into the phone. "He threw you out, that monster. I knew I never liked him. Oh, Mom, are you okay? Where are you? I'm coming to get you right now." Tears welled in my eyes at her fierce, immediate loyalty. "I'm okay, sweetie. I'm in a safe place. But you can't come here, not yet. I have a lawyer and she's very good. We have a plan, but I need you to be strong and trust me." "Trust you? Of course I trust you. Dad is the one who's been acting strange for months. Secretive phone calls, unexplained credit card charges. I thought he was having an affair." She let out a dark laugh. "I guess he was. What can I do to help?" "You can just be my daughter," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Just knowing you believe me is enough for now. But don't talk to your father. If he calls, be polite, but don't engage. Don't tell him you've spoken to me. Can you do that?" "Anything, Mom. I'll do anything. I love you." "I love you too, sweetie." After I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle lines had been drawn, and my children had chosen their sides. One was blinded by the money, the other by love and loyalty. It was a painful division, but it clarified everything. Richard hadn't just declared war on me, he had declared war on our family. And he had underestimated the strength of a mother's bond with her daughter. We were no longer just a legal team. We were an army. The days that followed were a blur of legal strategy and emotional fortification. Sarah, true to her word, moved with the speed and precision of a military general. She advised me to leave the Sleepy Hollow motel immediately. Richard's lawyers will have private investigators looking for you, she explained over the phone. They'll want to serve you papers, but they'll also want to get pictures of you, try to build a profile. Is she spending money? Is she meeting with anyone? We need you in a clean, secure, and anonymous location. With what money? I asked, the practical reality of my situation a constant, nagging weight. My firm will advance you the funds for a security deposit and the first 2 months, rent on a modest apartment, she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Consider it a necessary operational expense. It will be deducted from the final settlement. Find a 1-bedroom in a large, secure building in a part of the city where you won't stand out. Pay for everything with the debit card I'm having couriered to you. It's linked to an account funded by my firm. Use it for rent, for groceries, for necessities. Keep every single receipt. We need to show the court that you are living a frugal and responsible life, while your husband is trying to abscond with $50 million. Following her instructions, I spent the next day apartment hunting, a surreal experience. I was a 58-year-old woman with no job, no credit history of my own, and no references, looking for a home. I found a small, clean apartment in a large, nondescript building on the west side of the city. It had a view of a brick wall and the constant hum of a ventilation system, but it was safe, and more importantly, it was mine. Handing over the cashier's check from Sarah's firm, for the deposit felt like a monumental act of independence. The apartment was furnished with the bare minimum: a bed, a small sofa, a wobbly card table, and 2 folding chairs. It was a sterile, lonely space, but as I stood in the middle of the empty living room, I didn't feel despair. I felt a sense of potential, of a blank slate. For the first time, I had a space that was entirely my own, with no history, no memories of Richard, no ghosts. I bought a single coffee mug, a plate, and a set of silverware from a discount store. That night, I ate macaroni and cheese from a box at my wobbly card table, and it tasted like freedom. My quiet new life was shattered a few days later by the arrival of a thick package from a legal courier. It was Richard's response to my divorce petition. I sat at my card table, my hands trembling as I opened it. The document was hundreds of pages long, a dense forest of legalese, but the message was brutally clear. It was a declaration of war, and I was the enemy. The papers painted a picture of me that I didn't recognize. I was, according to Richard's high-priced lawyers, a financially irresponsible and emotionally volatile woman. They claimed our marriage had been irretrievably broken for over a decade, and that we had been living essentially separate lives under the same roof. They alleged that I had a history of lavish and impulsive spending that had put the family in a precarious financial position for years. This, they argued, was why Richard managed all the finances himself, to protect the family from my recklessness. It was a complete and utter fabrication. I was the one who clipped coupons, who turned leftovers into new meals, who painstakingly balanced the checkbook every month. He was the one who bought new golf clubs every season and insisted on expensive, flashy cars. The document went on to claim that the $20 I had given him for the lottery ticket was a repayment for a small personal loan, and that my suggestion to buy a ticket was a passing, casual comment with no legal weight. They were trying to build a narrative where I was nothing more than a distant, unstable roommate to whom he owed nothing. I read each lie, each twisted half-truth, and with every word, my sorrow hardened into a diamond-edged anger. He wasn't just trying to take the money, he was trying to steal my past, to invalidate my entire contribution to our 35-year partnership. He was trying to erase me. I stood up and began to pace the small apartment, the legal documents clutched in my hand. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would read these vicious lies and be so ashamed, so beaten down, that I would accept whatever crumbs he offered. He was wrong. Every lie they told was another piece of armor for me. I met Jessica the next day at a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop. She slid into the booth, her face etched with worry. "Mom, are you okay? I was so worried when you said you'd moved." I slid the legal documents across the table. "Read this. This is what your father thinks of me." She read for several minutes, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. "Lavish spending. Mom, you wore the same winter coat for 10 years, emotionally volatile. He was the one who would fly into a rage if dinner was 5 minutes late. This is disgusting." She looked up at me, her eyes flashing. "We have to fight this. He can't get away with these lies." "We will," I assured her. "But Sarah says we need more than just my word against his. We need proof of his lies, of his affair, of any financial secrecy." Jessica nodded, a determined look on her face. "I think I can help with that. Remember a few months ago, Dad got a new P.O. box. He said it was for his business to keep his mail separate. I thought it was weird. I saw a bill for it on his desk once. I think I remember the box number." My heart skipped a beat. A secret P.O. box could hold anything: credit card statements, bank statements, perhaps even letters from Tiffany. "And there's more," Jessica continued, lowering her voice. "That woman, Tiffany, I've seen her before. She's a cocktail waitress at the country club, the one Dad started going to all the time last year. Everyone knows she has a reputation for latching onto wealthy older men. Dad's friends must know about it. Maybe one of them would be willing to talk." The information was invaluable. It was the first crack in the fortress of lies Richard was trying to build. I hugged my daughter, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, sweetie. You are so strong." "I get it from my mom," she said, squeezing my hand. The contrast between my two children was a constant source of both pain and strength. A few days after meeting with Jessica, I received another call from Mark. His tone was different this time, not confused, but slick, like a salesman. "Mom, I've been talking to Dad. He feels terrible about how all this has blown up. He says his lawyers are just being aggressive, that he doesn't really believe all that stuff they wrote about you." "Then he should fire his lawyers and tell the truth," I said flatly. "Well, look, he wants to make this right," Mark continued, ignoring my comment. "He wants to offer you a settlement. He's willing to give you $1 million. Mom, that's a lot of money. You'd be set for life. You wouldn't have to work. You could buy a nice little condo somewhere." "It's a very generous offer." I listened to my son, my own flesh and blood, trying to sell me on a deal brokered by my betrayer, and I felt a profound sense of pity for him. Richard had bought him, body and soul. "Mark, let me explain something to you," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Your father is not offering me $1 million. He is offering me 2% of our shared marital assets. He is offering to pay me 2 cents for every dollar that is rightfully mine. He thinks my dignity, my self-respect, and my 35 years of life can be bought for the price of a rounding error on his new fortune. It's not a generous offer, Mark. It's an insult." It was a heartbreaking conversation, the kind that splits families apart. I know some of you watching Mama Lottie stories have faced difficult family moments too, moments where you have to stand up for what is right, even when it's painful. Let me know in the comments how you found the strength to get through it. Your stories give strength to all of us. "Mom, you're being emotional," Mark said, his voice laced with the condescending tone his father so often used. "You should take the deal. If you go to court, you could end up with nothing." "Tell your father my answer is no," I said. "And Mark, don't call me again on his behalf. You are my son, not his messenger boy. When you're ready to talk to your mother, you know my number." I hung up the phone, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I had lost my husband, and now it seemed I had lost my son. But I had my daughter, and I had my self-respect. When I told Sarah about the settlement offer, she laughed out loud. $1 million. That's not even a serious offer. That's what they offer to make a nuisance go away. They're testing your resolve, Alina. They think you're a desperate woman living in a motel who will jump at the first sign of cash. They have no idea who they're dealing with. So what's our next move? I asked. Our next move is discovery, she said, her voice full of energy. We are going to subpoena everything. Bank records, credit card statements, phone logs, emails, and the contents of that secret P.O. box your daughter told you about. We are going to build a timeline that proves he was planning this betrayal for months, maybe even years. We are going to find out exactly how much money he spent on Tiffany while he was telling you that you couldn't afford to fix a leaky roof. We are going to turn over every single stone. By the time we're done, Richard Vance is going to wish he'd never heard the word lottery. A few weeks later, Sarah called me with the first fruits of our discovery process. Eleanor, are you sitting down? We got a court order to open the P.O. box, and we hit the jackpot. My breath caught in my throat. What did you find? We found statements from a secret bank account he opened 6 months ago. He'd been diverting money into it every week. Not a lot, just a few hundred here and there, but it shows intent to hide assets. We also found credit card statements. Thousands of dollars in charges. Jewelry from Tiffany & Co. weekend trips to luxury spa resorts. Lingerie from Victoria's Secret. He was funding his entire affair with your shared money. Each word was a fresh stab of betrayal, but it was also a nail in Richard's legal coffin. And then there's the grand prize, Sarah said, her voice dripping with triumphant glee. We found a lease application for a penthouse apartment downtown. It was dated 2 days before the lottery win, and it was signed by 2 people, Richard Vance and Tiffany Dubois. He hadn't just decided to leave me after he won. He was already leaving. He had already found a new apartment, a new life with his new woman. The lottery win wasn't the cause of our breakup. It was just the fuel that had accelerated it, that had made him feel invincible enough to be cruel. He thought he was so clever, I whispered, the full scope of his deception settling over me. He's not clever, Eleanor, Sarah corrected me. He's arrogant, and arrogance makes people sloppy. This lease application is the final nail. It proves his entire narrative is a lie. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a premeditated plan to abandon his wife of 35 years. No judge in the country is going to look kindly on that. I should have felt elated, but I just felt tired and incredibly sad. The man I had loved, the father of my children, was a complete stranger, a hollow man filled with greed and deceit. The victory felt strangely like a loss. What now? I asked, my voice weary. Now we prepare for depositions, Sarah said. That's when their lawyers get to question you under oath and I get to question him. It will be grueling. They will try to break you. But we have the truth, Eleanor. And we have the proof. All you have to do is stay strong and tell your story, and I will take care of the rest. The weeks leading up to the depositions were the most intense of my life. My small, anonymous apartment became a war room. Sarah had couriers deliver boxes of documents, copies of our bank statements for the last 10 years, tax returns, property deeds, and now, the contents of Richard's secret life. I spent hours at my wobbly card table with a highlighter and a notepad, poring over the numbers, relearning the financial story of my own marriage. Sarah and I met frequently, not in her office, but in my apartment. She wanted me to be comfortable, to feel that we were on my home turf. We role-played the deposition for hours. She would take on the persona of Richard's lawyer, a ruthless corporate litigator named Arthur Sterling, whose reputation preceded him. She was merciless, mimicking the condescending tone and tricky, leading questions he was famous for. Mrs. Vance, isn't it true that you had no real involvement in the family's finances, that your husband handled all the major decisions? She would ask, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. The first time I stammered. Well, I paid the bills. No, Sarah said, immediately breaking character. No stammering, no uncertainty. You are not a confused housewife, Eleanor. You were a partner. Answer with facts. Let's try again. We did this for hours, day after day. I learned to answer precisely, without emotion. I managed the household budget and balanced our joint checking account every month for 35 years. I learned to say, I don't recall instead of guessing. I learned to sit in silence and wait for the next question, not feeling the need to fill the uncomfortable space. I was being forged in a crucible of legal strategy, and the weak, heartbroken woman who had fled her home was being burned away, leaving behind someone harder, stronger, and far more dangerous to Richard's cause. The day of the depositions arrived, a crisp, overcast morning in October. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy blue dress, the pearl earrings my father had given me, and low, practical heels. My clothes were not expensive, but they were immaculate. I was aiming for dignity, not wealth. Jessica drove me to the law firm where the depositions were being held, a neutral territory. She squeezed my hand as I got out of the car. "Just tell the truth, Mom. You've got this." The conference room was a sterile, intimidating space, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. On one side sat Richard, looking tanned and fit in a new, exquisitely tailored suit. He looked every bit the multimillionaire. Next to him was Arthur Sterling, a man in his 60s with silver hair, a severe expression, and the cold, reptilian eyes of a shark. They both looked at me as I entered, Richard with a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Was it guilt? Or just annoyance? And Sterling with a dismissive glance that sized me up and found me wanting. Sarah was already there, a calm, solid presence at our side of the table. She gave my hand a reassuring squeeze under the table. A court stenographer sat at the end, her fingers poised over her machine. The whole setup was designed to be intimidating, to make me feel small and powerless. But as I sat down and placed my hands calmly on the table, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. As expected, Sterling began with me. For 4 grueling hours, he questioned me about every aspect of my life. He was patronizing, condescending, and relentless. He tried to twist my words, to paint my role as a homemaker as a life of leisure and dependency. "So, Mrs. Vance, while your husband was working 60-hour weeks to build his business, you were, what? Attending book club meetings. Having lunch with friends. I was raising our 2 children," I said, my voice even, my eyes locked on his. "I was managing our home, cooking every meal, doing the laundry, running the errands, scheduling the appointments, volunteering at their schools, and providing the stable, loving environment that allowed my husband to focus on his career." He moved on to our finances, pulling out statements and highlighting my occasional purchases. "I see a charge here for $200 at a spa. Would you call that a frugal expense, Mrs. Vance?" "That was a birthday gift certificate from my daughter," I replied without missing a beat. "I used it for a massage to help with the sciatica I developed after years of housekeeping. My husband, on the other hand, spent $5,000 on a new set of golf clubs that same month. You can find that charge on page 47 of the Amex statement." I saw a flicker of surprise in Sterling's eyes. He wasn't used to witnesses who had done their homework. He tried a different tack, attempting to portray me as ignorant and uninvolved. "Isn't it true that you signed whatever financial documents your husband put in front of you without reading them?" "I trusted my husband of 35 years, I said. "A mistake I will not be making again." He grilled me about the day the ticket was purchased, trying to get me to admit the $20 was a gift, a loan, anything other than what it was. I stuck to the truth, repeating the same simple facts over and over. "I gave him a $20 bill from my wallet. I asked him to buy a lottery ticket for us with our numbers." By the end of the 4 hours, I was emotionally exhausted, but I hadn't cracked. I hadn't cried, I hadn't yelled, I hadn't let him fluster me. I had simply told the truth. As Sterling finally said, "I have no further questions for this witness, for now," Sarah gave my leg a gentle kick of victory under the table. During a short break before Richard's deposition began, I went to the ladies' room. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was tired, but her eyes were clear. She had faced the enemy and held her ground. Standing up for yourself after being broken down is one of the hardest things a person can do. So many people in the Mama Lottie Stories community have shared their own experiences of finding that inner strength. It's a reminder that we are all more resilient than we think. If you have a story about a time you surprised yourself with your own strength, please share it in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs to see today. When we reconvened, it was Richard's turn. He sat in the witness chair with an air of supreme confidence, smiling at his lawyer as if this were all just a minor inconvenience. He looked at Sarah with unconcealed disdain, as if she were a gnat he was about to swat away. That was his first mistake. Sarah began her questioning, her voice gentle, almost conversational. She started with his career, his business, letting him boast about his financial acumen, about how he had built his success from the ground up. "And your wife, Alina, she supported you in these endeavors?" Sarah asked mildly. "She kept the house clean," Richard said with a dismissive shrug. "That was her role." "I see," Sarah said, making a note. She then moved on to his relationship with Tiffany Dubois. "Mr. Vance, can you tell us the nature of your relationship with Ms. Dubois?" Sterling immediately objected. "Relevance. It speaks to the fraudulent dissipation of marital assets, counsel," Sarah shot back. "Overruled," she added, looking at Sterling as if he were a slow student. Richard smirked. "Tiffany is a dear friend, a supportive companion during a difficult time in my life." "A difficult time? Were you and your wife having marital problems?" "As I stated in my declaration, our marriage had been over for years," Richard said, reciting the lie his lawyers had crafted for him. "I see," Sarah said again, her voice still mild. She picked up a document from the stack in front of her. "I have here a credit card statement for a card held in your name. On May 12th of this year, there is a charge for $3,800 at Tiffany & Co. Can you tell us what you purchased?" Richard shifted in his seat. I believe I bought myself a new watch." "A watch," Sarah said, raising an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because we also have the receipt from that purchase. It was for a diamond tennis bracelet with a gift card that read, 'To my darling Tiffy, my future. All my love, Rich.'" Richard's face paled. Sterling shot him a furious look. My husband had just been caught in a lie, under oath. Sarah didn't pause. She picked up another stack of papers. "These are the statements from a secret bank account you opened, Mr. Vance. An account your wife was unaware of. Can you explain why you were diverting marital funds into this account for 6 months?" "That was my personal business account," he stammered, his earlier confidence beginning to evaporate. "Your personal business account that you used to pay for weekend getaways to Napa and the Bahamas with Ms. Dubois. Weekends you told your wife you were at financial conferences." Richard was silent, his jaw tight. Sarah's voice lost its gentle tone, replaced now by the sharp, cutting edge of a surgeon's scalpel. She was no longer asking questions. She was stating facts, building an unshakable wall of evidence around him. She presented the hotel bills, the florist receipts, the lingerie purchases. With each new piece of evidence, Richard seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. The smug millionaire was gone, replaced by a cornered, sweating liar. Then, Sarah paused, letting the silence in the room hang heavy for a moment. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out one final document, placing it on the table with deliberate care. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice now dangerously quiet, "I have one last exhibit for you. This is a lease application for a penthouse apartment at the Grandview Towers. It is dated June 10th, 2 days before you purchased the winning lottery ticket." She pushed the document across the table towards him. His eyes darted down, and I saw the last of the color drain from his face. He knew what was coming. "There are 2 signatures on this application, Mr. Vance," Sarah continued, her eyes boring into him. "One is yours. Please, for the record, could you identify the second signature on this document, the one listed as your co-tenant?" Arthur Sterling put his hand on Richard's arm, trying to stop him, but it was too late. Richard looked at the paper, then up at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and defeat. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. Richard stared at the lease agreement as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. The silence in the conference room was so absolute I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Arthur Sterling, his face a grim mask of professional fury, leaned in and whispered something urgently to Richard. For a moment, I thought Richard might refuse to answer, might plead the fifth or simply walk out. But Sarah's question hung in the air, a perfectly crafted instrument of legal destruction, and there was no escape. "Mr. Vance," Sarah repeated, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. "The name of the co-tenant, please." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't even look at Sarah. He stared at a fixed point on the polished table, his multi-million-dollar empire crumbling to dust around him. "Tiffany Dubois," he mumbled, the words barely audible. "I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you," Sarah said, leaning forward. "Could you please speak up for the court reporter?" Richard's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with impotent rage. Tiffany Dubois. He spat, the name echoing in the silent room. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice laced with a lethal calmness. She turned to face his lawyer. "So, to summarize, Mr. Vance, you claim your marriage was over for years, yet just 3 months ago you bought your wife an anniversary gift and took her to the restaurant where you proposed. You claim the lottery win prompted your decision to leave. Yet 2 days before the win, you signed a lease on a new home with your mistress. You claim the lottery ticket was purchased with your own personal funds, yet you have no receipts to prove that, and your wife has a clear, verifiable memory of the transaction, right down to the source of the $20 bill she gave you. You claim to be a man of high financial integrity, yet for the last 6 months, you have been systematically diverting marital assets into secret accounts to fund a clandestine affair. Have I missed anything, Mr. Vance?" Richard was speechless. He just sat there, his mouth slightly agape, looking at his lawyer with a desperate, pleading expression. Arthur Sterling, for his part, looked as though he had just swallowed a gallon of sour milk. He knew the case was lost. We all did. Every lie Richard had told, every piece of his carefully constructed narrative, had been systematically dismantled and exposed. "I have no further questions for this witness," Sarah said, closing her folder with a crisp, final snap. The deposition was over. Richard and Sterling practically fled the room without making eye contact with either of us. I remained seated, a wave of exhaustion so profound it felt physical washing over me. Sarah put her hand on my shoulder. "You were magnificent, Alina," she said softly. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now," she said with a grim smile, "they call us to surrender. Arthur Sterling is a proud man, but he's not a stupid one. He will not let this go to a public trial. He knows that any judge who sees this evidence will not just split the assets 50-50. They might award you more, plus punitive damages for the fraud. A public trial would be a humiliation for his client and a stain on his own record. He'll advise Richard to settle, and to settle fast." She was right. The call came 2 days later. Arthur Sterling, his voice devoid of its earlier arrogance, proposed a meeting in his office. "Just the lawyers," he stipulated, "to discuss a potential resolution." Sarah went to the meeting alone. I waited in my apartment, pacing the small living room, my nerves a tangled mess. This was it, the culmination of everything. 3 hours later, Sarah called me. "Alina," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "How does $25 million sound to you?" I sank onto my sofa, the phone slipping from my grasp. 25 million. The number was so large, so abstract, it didn't feel real. It was half, exactly half. "They're also agreeing to pay for all of your legal fees," Sarah continued, "and an additional $500,000 in a lump sum for emotional distress. Richard gets to keep his business, which is fair, and you get the house. Not the beach house, your house, the family home, unencumbered. You get the Lexus. He gets the golf clubs." The last part was said with a touch of triumphant sarcasm. They are desperate to make this go away, a leaner. They don't want any of the evidence from that deposition, especially the lease and the secret bank accounts, to ever see the inside of a courtroom. So it's over. I asked, my mind struggling to catch up. It's over, we won, all you have to do is say yes. Yes, I whispered. Yes. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork. I signed documents that felt heavier than bricks, each signature severing another tie to my old life and building the foundation for a new one. The money, a staggering sum, was transferred into a new set of accounts in my name only, managed by a financial advisor Sarah had recommended. The day I was to take possession of the house was strange. I hadn't been back since the day Richard threw me out. Jessica went with me. Richard had been given 48 hours to remove his personal belongings. We walked in the front door, and it was as if a storm had passed through. His clothes were gone from the closets, his books gone from the shelves, his presence almost entirely erased. Almost. He had left things behind. Not by accident, I realized, but by design. On the kitchen counter was a single, wilting rose in a cheap vase. In the bedroom, on the pillow on his side of the bed, was a photograph of the two of us from our wedding day. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt at emotional manipulation, a final, desperate act of a man who had lost all power. I picked up the photo, looked at the young, hopeful faces staring back at me, and felt a pang of sadness not for what I had lost, but for the man Richard could have been, the man he had thrown away for greed. I dropped the photograph into the trash can. Then I picked up the wilting rose and threw it in after. "Let's clean this place out, Mom," Jessica said, her voice firm. "Let's get rid of all the ghosts." And we did. We spent the next week purging the house of every last remnant of my life with Richard. We donated his old armchairs, packed away the photo albums filled with forced smiles, and painted over the bland beige walls with bright, cheerful colors. It was a cleansing, a reclamation. With each bag of trash we took out, I felt lighter, freer. One afternoon, during our cleaning frenzy, Mark showed up at the front door. He looked terrible. He was pale, had dark circles under his eyes, and had lost weight. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Jessica shot him a look of pure ice but said nothing. We sat in the newly painted living room on the new sofa I had just had delivered. For a long time, he just stared at his hands. "I saw the settlement papers," he finally said. "Dad showed them to me. He told me everything. About the affair, the secret accounts, the penthouse. He didn't even try to deny it. He just laughed. He said he was stupid to get caught, not that he was sorry for what he did." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "He offered me money," Mark continued, his voice cracking. "A lot of money. A finder's fee," he called it, for trying to get you to take that first settlement offer. He wanted to reward me for betraying you. Tears started to stream down his face. I said no. I told him he was a monster and that I didn't want his dirty money. I told him he had lost his son. He just shrugged and told me to have a nice life. He doesn't care, Mom. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. He looked up at me, his face a mask of shame and regret. I was so stupid. I was so blinded by the money, by him. I chose him over you. And you were the one telling the truth all along. Can you ever forgive me, Mom? I looked at my son, my firstborn, a grown man crying like a little boy. The anger I had felt towards him had long since faded, replaced by a deep maternal ache. He had made a terrible mistake, but he was my son. "I forgive you, Mark," I said softly, and I meant it. Our relationship would never be the same, the trust would have to be rebuilt piece by piece, but he was welcome to come home. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The house, once a place of betrayal, became my sanctuary. Jessica moved in with me for a while, and her bright, youthful energy helped to chase away the last of the shadows. I reconnected with old friends, the real ones, who were horrified when they learned the truth of what Richard had done. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing my story and offering support to women who were fleeing their own domestic nightmares. I found a purpose in helping others reclaim their lives, just as I had reclaimed mine. One day, about 6 months after the settlement, I was having lunch with Sarah to thank her again for everything. "You know," she said, sipping her iced tea, "I heard a funny story about your ex-husband." "Oh," I said, a flicker of curiosity stirring. I rarely thought of him anymore. Apparently, his life with Tiffany isn't the Parisian dream he imagined. The 50 million became 25. The penthouse lease was in both their names, so she got half of it in the breakup. And it turns out she had very expensive tastes and a very bad gambling habit. My source says Richard is worth less than 10 million now and is being hounded by creditors. I thought about this for a moment. I could have felt a sense of schadenfreude, of gleeful revenge, but I didn't. I just felt a quiet sense of finality. His choices had led him to his own self-made prison of greed and emptiness. My choices had led me here, to this sunny cafe, with a good friend, a loving family, and a future that was entirely my own. "Good for her," I said with a small smile. As we were leaving the cafe, I saw a headline on a newspaper in a stand. A local charity had received a record-breaking anonymous donation of $5 million to build a new wing for a children's hospital. I smiled to myself. Sarah had helped me set up the anonymous donation a few weeks prior. Richard thought his $50 million would buy him freedom, but he was wrong. Real freedom isn't about money. It's about dignity, integrity, and the love of your family. He had lost all of that. I, on the other hand, had lost a husband, but I had found myself. And that was a prize worth more than any lottery. Did you enjoy my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this for you from Mama Lottie Stories. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.